Welcome to Chautauqua People. My guest today is Tom Hagen. He is a native of Buffalo, moved to Erie, Pennsylvania at age 7, graduated from Strong Vincent High School and the Ohio State University, where he worked his way through college. He was married shortly after graduation, then entered the Navy, completing Officer Candidate School, and was commissioned in the Supply Corps. After 3.5 years of active duty, he joined Erie Insurance, a company where he had first worked at age 17. Tom eventually worked in most components of the company, eventually rising to the status of Chief Operating Officer. He was recently written up in James and Deborah Fallow's text, Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America. Erie Insurance, to quote them, the homegrown Fortune 500 company and largest Erie employer, which was founded by H.O. Hurt, an anti-war World War I socialist nearly a century ago, and remains under the ongoing family management through Hagen's son-in-law. Hagen's youthful vigor and informal, easy, generous manner is a model of what many people would hope to be. He and his late wife, Susie, have been behind Erie in so many ways that recounting them would fill extra pages in the book. Once we learned of the Hagens, we saw their names seemingly everywhere in philanthropic leadership, from rooms in the Art Museum to the back wing of Chautauqua Institution Amphitheater. One of Hagen's missions has been commitment to redeveloping the city's downtown and business space, which he has done through investments of hundreds of millions of dollars in Erie Insurance buildings in formerly troubled areas downtown. 3 primary projects at Chautauqua Institution stand out: renovation of the Hagen-Wensley Guest House, amphitheater reconstruction, and rebuild of the Miller Cottage. As a matter of full disclosure, my mother's sister married his father's brother. We had a common aunt and uncle who were my godparents, Cora and Howard Hagen. Though not technically related, our emails usually begin with the greeting, "Hi, cousin." Hi, cousin.
Hi, cousin.
Welcome to Chautauqua People. Tom, how did your family make its way to Chautauqua?
Well, I think it really goes back to my great-grandmother in Buffalo. I'm 4th generation Buffalonian, and she was very active in the auxiliary of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers. And she came to Chautauqua, and the family after that, my grandfather and my mother and I, came to Chautauqua. I'm the 1st generation, though, to own property here.
So you would be a 5th generation Chautauquan?
Well, 4th generation.
4th generation.
Yeah.
Your kids are 5th.
5th, yeah.
Grandkids are 6th.
6th, yeah.
So
How about that?
That's substantial. Now, let's talk about your Navy time initially after graduation.
Mm-hmm.
Where were you posted?
Well, I went to Navy OCS in Newport, Rhode Island, a wonderful place. And when I was commissioned, I went to Navy Supply Corps School in Athens, Georgia, 6 months there. And then I went back to Newport, thankfully, and spent the better part of 2 years on a destroyer as a department head, the head of the supply department, one of 4 department heads out of 15 officers, and had a great experience on a Atlantic Fleet destroyer.
Did you have any memorable port calls?
Well, we did. We were mostly out on the Atlantic chasing Russian submarines, or if we could find Russian submarines. But we did have some memorable port calls at Hamilton, Bermuda, and Montreal. They were good ones, New York City. But most of the time we were at sea.
Got it. Now, how did your wife Susie like becoming a Navy wife?
Well, immediately after we were married, in fact, the second day after we were on our way to Newport, she loved being a Navy wife, actually. You know, you could go on the base, and you know from your military experience, the base movie was about 15 cents. You could go to the commissary, so living was pretty reasonable. And there was a good, our wardroom, the officers in the wardroom and their wives, we were all about the same age, and it worked out very nicely for us.
Right. And did she play cards, or what did she do for her time?
Well, she did. She was a good bridge player, and I found out after one trip at sea when I was a junior ensign, not long after I was on the ship, I came back and found out that she was playing cards with a woman by the name of Peanuts Leahy and beating her. And I said, "Do you know who she is?" And my wife had no idea. Turned out to be the wife of the Commodore, who was in charge of all 8 ships in our destroyer squadron.
How did that affect your career?
Well, I was concerned at first, but I knew Susie could carry it off well, and she did, and they became fast friends, actually.
That's nifty. That's nifty.
Yeah.
And what were some of your other assignments in the Naval Reserve after active duty?
Well, while I was still in active duty, I went to the Naval Supply Depot in Newport. I was Fleet Liaison Officer. And then on reserve duty, I spent time at the Navy Finance Center in Cleveland, and most of the time on the logistics staff of the Commander-in-Chief Atlantic Fleet in Norfolk, and that was good duty.
And then you stayed long enough to retire?
I stayed long enough to retire as a captain, and I thought about staying in a little longer. I didn't have to retire, but it gets a little political, and if you start going up into flag rank, there's a commitment that I just couldn't give at that time.
Right. They wanted a lot of time. And
They wanted 7 years guaranteed time, and I just couldn't do it.
couldn't do it by all means. Now, then after you left the Navy, well, you're still doing the reserve work, you joined Erie Insurance. And can you tell me a little bit about what you did during those early years?
Well, first of all, I joined Erie Insurance when I was 17
Got
years
it.
old, right after high school, and worked there part-time all through college, full-time in the summers. And then my father-in-law, who was the founder of the company, wanted me to come back to be his assistant. I seriously considered the Navy as a career, and he made an offer I couldn't refuse. Although I found out, believe it or not, that we didn't talk money. And when I got back to Erie and I got my first paycheck, I found that I got $100 a week, or $5,200 a year, which was a $2,000 a year pay cut from a Lieutenant JG in the U.S. Navy. That didn't rest too well with my wife, but my boss, my father-in-law, said, you know, it'll take care of itself over time, and indeed it did.
Got it. Got it. And so you had to live within your means, and that settles it.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit more about the company today. How many employees does it have?
Well, Erie Insurance today, when I joined it, there were 100 employees, and we only had 3 branch offices in Pennsylvania. Today, we operate in 13 jurisdictions. 12 states and the District of Columbia have about 17 or 18 offices and have something over 5,000 employees. About half of them are in Erie. And today, we are the largest employer in Erie. We've overtaken GE, that's been there over 100 years, but it's been downsizing its workforce.
Right. And what sort of work do those employees do in Erie then?
Well, it's where our central location is for all of the underwriting of policies, the policy issuing, billing, all of those administrative duties are done at the home office, whereas our field offices are for taking care of claims and that sort of thing, direct assisting customers, and working with our independent agents whose customers are our customers.
I know I've had several friends who had Erie Insurance, including a neighbor, and we had a hurricane come through, and they indicated how well taken care of they were. And that's a genuine comment, and the claims were settled fairly and quickly, and it was just a tree falls on your car in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah.
That's not misbehavior, that's bad luck.
Yeah, that is. Well, we're always pleased to hear those stories. We try very hard, particularly when it comes to catastrophe. We have catastrophe teams that saddle up and get right to the scene. Usually, we are the first insurance company on the scene.
That's a terrific record. Now, can you tell me about some of the other projects you're doing in Erie besides Erie Insurance?
Well, one of the things that we're working on at Erie Insurance, and our CEO is leading now, is an effort called Erie Downtown Development Corporation. We've patterned this after a similar venture in Cincinnati. where they redeveloped an area called Over the Rhine, which was near the downtown. Ours is concentrating on the downtown core. And to try to bring it alive, to bring in housing, market rate housing, to have people living downtown, to bring back businesses, to renovate buildings. And we've raised privately in Erie something between $25 and $30 million. It's never happened in the 233 years history of the city of Erie. So we're well on our way. There's a great enthusiasm among everybody in town. We have a new mayor that's, you never hear of a politician after they're elected going around knocking on doors. And this new mayor is still knocking on doors to find out what people are thinking in the inner city. So there are a lot of good things going on in Erie.
Now, one of the points Fallows make in their book is that many of the Rust Belt cities simply watch their population go down, and Erie has embraced refugees.
Mm-hmm.
And he suggests that about 10% of the population in Erie are refugees.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, our population peaked around 1960 at about close to 140,000. We're down just a hair under 100,000 now. And about 10% of the population, about 10,000, are refugees from a wide range of countries. It started with Bosnia, and we now have them from Nepal and the countries in that area around Nepal, Bhutan, and some from Africa. But we are a major resettlement city for example, people from Bosnia that came about 20, 25 years ago. In fact, my housekeeper is Bosnian and a delightful person and a hard worker.
And so that's worked out for Erie then, hasn't it?
It has worked out, and they've now are opening businesses. So we'll see that develop. And one of the other things we're trying to do is to have an innovation district downtown and to get people, young people that are have an entrepreneurial spirit to come and locate there. And that can include some of the so-called refugees that have come there too, as these kids are getting educated and going to college, a lot of them locally. We want them to stay in the community if we can.
And not depart and take their education with them.
Yeah.
That's an immensely significant thing. Now, can you tell me, what is the Jefferson Educational Society?
Well, that was started about 10 years ago. Actually, this year is the 10th anniversary by a former president of Mercyhurst University in Erie. And it's to be, it's called Erie's Think Tank, to bring issues to the fore and discuss them in a civil manner, much like Chautauqua, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, some of it's patterned after Chautauqua. The current president and leader of the organization just got his Doctor of Education degree writing about the Chautauquas, all of the Chautauquas and the
Mm-hmm.
Chautauqua movement. We have every year in October and November a summit with a week-long series of speakers, much like Chautauqua again. And we've got one big array of speakers. This year, David Ignatius, Doris Kearns Goodwin, just to name a few, the Fallows, Jim and Deb Fallows. It's a stellar lineup.
If somebody wanted to come, is this open to the public?
It's open to the public, yes, by all means. And in fact, they can Google Jefferson Educational Society in Erie, Pennsylvania, and they can find out all the information they want.
Ready there to go. Now tell me about the Hagen History Center.
Well, we've had a museum in Erie for a number of years in an old mansion that was built in the early 1890s on what's called Millionaires Row on West 6th Street. It's known as the Watson-Curtsey Mansion. And through some dynamic leadership, actually, in the last few years, the mansion has been totally renovated, restored, cleaned up, air conditioning, new wiring, the whole 9 yards. And then and they were kind enough to name the complex, the Hagen History Center, after me, and I was very flattered about that. But it has more than just that one building. It has an old carriage house with a reading room in it. It has an archives building that is climate controlled. They have a tremendous amount of archives. And then there's a house next door to the east of it that was built in the late 1850s by the surgeon aboard the USS Michigan. Was the only warship of the United States on the Great Lakes. It was the first iron-hulled warship in the U.S. Navy. And he went on to become the first Surgeon General of the United States Navy. But he built this house. Another family bought it, the Morrison family, and lived in it for 92 years.
Wow.
The last tenant, it was a law firm, but now the museum has taken that over, and we're restoring and renovating it to become an educational center.
Now, does the collection focus on something in specific?
Well, we have a couple of major items. One is the Civil War. We have one of the finest collections in the country of regimental history, and it happens to be the 83rd Pennsylvania, which was commanded at one time by Colonel Strong Vincent High School, and he went on to be a brigade commander who was in charge of the Union Army defense of Little Round Top at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was mortally wounded there. The 83rd Regiment was part of his brigade. Also, the 20th Maine was part of his brigade. There was also a New York regiment in there. And they really saved the day for the Battle of Gettysburg. And it was through the initiative of Vincent that they went to that place. And there was another connection, if you don't mind me going on here. Strong Vincent was a colonel, but he was made a brigade commander. On his deathbed, he was promoted, not posthumously, he was still alive, to brigadier general. But his orderly with him was a man by the name of Oliver Norton, who was from West Springfield, Erie County, Pennsylvania. And he is the Norton of the first bugler to bugle taps. And he's the Norton behind the Norton family of Norton Hall at Chautauqua Institution.
One more connection you can draw for us. Strong Vincent to Chautauqua.
Well, okay. His father and John Heil Vincent, the co-founder of Chautauqua, were first cousins. So there's a connection there. There's always been a close connection between Erie and Chautauqua, I think, and Jamestown over the years.
And that's worked out quite well. Now, let's talk for just a minute about your publication with Jeff Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me a little what's involved there.
Well, as you know, Jeff Simpson is well known at Chautauqua Institution. He, over the years, he was a lifelong Chautauquan with his family and authored several books about Chautauqua. In fact, I think one is the Chautauqua, the Utopia, or something of that sort. But about 10 years ago, I got interested in writing up something about an ancestor of mine who was a founder of the state of Vermont. He was a hero in the French and Indian War. He was a brigadier in the militia in the Revolution. And one thing led to another. I had a first-class researcher from Erie that was working on it. I needed somebody to write it, and I turned to Jeff Simpson, and Jeff has been working on that, and it's now finished in the hands of a publisher. Sadly, Jeff is very ill right now down in Pittsburgh, and our thoughts and prayers are with him.
By all means. And he was to appear on this program, interviewed to be, I guess, 2 weeks or a week ago. Mm-hmm. And the transportation was set up to bring him from the institution here, and that afternoon he went to the hospital instead. And so we're just heartsick about the situation. Mm-hmm. He's a man of great character, and we thought would make a great interview.
Right.
And so our prayers are there too. Now let's just talk for a few minutes about your connection to Chautauqua and your very generous help. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've done with the Hagen Wensley house, how that came about.
Well, it really came about through my late wife, Susie, who was a trustee at one point of the institution, and I was a director of the foundation. And knowing, being interested in, both of us being very interested in the lecture platform, but the quarters that they had to stay in were substandard. And it was something on the wish list of the Chautauqua administration for a long time. So through Susie's efforts, we were able to provide the funds for them to do what really became more of a rebuild as opposed to a renovation, because the place was so poorly constructed. But, and then she took it personally, the redecoration in the inside. Or the decoration, it wasn't so much redecoration. So that was really her project, and then the amphitheater, she really was interested in that and interested in having the amphitheater rebuilt. We know that it was in very, very poor physical condition. I think the crowning blow was when they separated the amphitheater from the organ chamber, and the roof was so shaky they had to just pull it down, meaning that the fragile organ chamber was holding up the amphitheater. That would not last much longer. And so she was very much interested. We both were interested, but it was really more of her project, and we worked closely with Tom Becker on that. And then the Miller Edison Cottage, I have felt for a long time. I knew that the Arnn family, he's a great-grandson of Lewis Miller, needed to sell and wanted to sell the property, but really wanted the institution to have it. And so they had a very, very reasonable price for it, considering that real estate and what the real estate values are at Chautauqua. And I just, having done so much renovation and restoration of houses, I just couldn't see that not going to the institution.
Right.
So I made it possible for the institution to buy it. And we just had a successful fundraiser for the gardens, because Mina Miller Edison, Thomas Edison's second wife and the daughter of Lewis Miller, renovated the place in around 1920, and it's exactly as she did it then. And she had a world-renowned landscape architect, and a woman in 1920, a landscape architect, Helen Biddle Shipman, designed the gardens. And so we have all of the plans and all of the plants. We're going to, we just have raised money to restore at least most of the gardens. We can't do all of them because there needs to be some open space, but at least the main part around the house. And that will be underway for next season, I hope.
Now, can you just go back a little bit of history? Where did that building come from?
Well, you know, Lewis Miller was a man of great inventive qualities. He invented a lot of things, and farm machinery. He had the building prefabricated in his shops in Akron and shipped here shipped to Mayville by rail, put on a steamer to Fairpoint, where the bell tower is, and then trucked up and assembled for the second assembly, the second year, 1875, in time for the sitting U.S. President, Ulysses S. Grant, to come and be his guest.
Goodness. And so that thing came then as planes, did it not?
Yeah.
That were assembled as opposed to cubes.
Yeah.
And so it really sets an example for prefab housing in Chautauqua, doesn't it?
Well, it's probably one of the first prefab buildings in America, and it's here. It's still standing since 1875. The founder, you know, entertained people there of note, as did his son-in-law, Thomas Edison. My goodness, Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, the Oaks from the New York Times, on and on and on, were guests in that house.
And so to let it go would be a tragedy, wouldn't
Oh,
it?
it really would be, yeah.
Okay. And was it in bad shape physically, or?
No, actually, it's in very good shape. The Miller and Arnn families kept it in very, very good shape. There's some minor structural things that will be taken care of. It's nothing that from maintenance or anything. It was just the structure that needs to be beefed up a little bit. But it's in beautiful condition. The main things that we have to do for public use is handicapped access and public restrooms and so on. So that sort of thing is being considered.
Right,
You know.
right. Tom, I want to go back to one thing I thought about after we talked earlier, and that is you have you had a long-term connection with Erie Insurance, and you've probably seen a lot of change along the way. I wonder if you could review that and go one step further and venture a guess when another generation of Chautauquans is making a Chautauquan interview. You and I are both in the old folks' home, the old soldiers' home.
Old soldiers' home. Soldiers and sailors' home.
Indeed, I stand corrected. Okay. We just said the old soldiers' home, but it'll be the old soldiers and sailors' home.
Okay.
What do you predict for Erie Insurance? What do you predict for the industry?
Well, Erie Insurance has always been able to adapt and hopefully be nimble to changes that come along. Back when we started, most of the insurance was sold through agents of old line stock companies, and the agents themselves issued the policies, not the companies. We were one of the first for the company to do it. Now everybody does it that way because it's just simpler to do it with the computerized equipment that you have today. One of the things facing us in our industry is self-driving automobiles. We're watching that technology very, very closely. We believe that within 5 years there will be a driverless car technology available. The question is, how long does it take for that to get out everywhere? Can we have driverless cars on the back roads of Chautauqua County where there is not the infrastructure to guide the car? Who's going to pay for that infrastructure? Cities maybe can do it a little better. So there are a lot of questions about the future of that, but we're monitoring that very carefully and looking at what other options are. We offer a whole array of insurance and commercial insurance, life insurance, so we're pretty much on top of it.
Goodness.
Homeowners too.
And that's tough. Even just things as pricing. How should you price a policy for a driverless automobile with no track record of accidents and the like?
Well, that's going to be a good question. Also, the question of liability. Who's going to be liable when there's an accident? Is it going to be the car company that made it? Is it going to be the guy that owns the car? Who's it going to be? So there are a lot of questions that have to be developed and answered before we are going in that direction.
So it's really an exciting business, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know, people don't think of insurance as exciting, but I'll tell you, makes it an exciting part of it. So,
Yeah. Tom, can you believe we're out of time?
okay. Well,
What else do we need to talk about?
well, I can't think of anything else right now, except it's a pleasure to be here, and I dearly love being in Chautauqua County. As you may know, I was a director for some time with the Robert H. Jackson Center, and I support it, and I love to be over here.
Great. Thank you so very much, and do come back.
Okay, thank you.
See you now.
Okay.